Long ago, in a village nestled between rolling hills and vast forests, the people lived simple, contented lives. The village, known for its abundant crops and thriving livestock, had never known hardship, nor had its people ever faced any true disaster. They trusted the land, the gods, and their rulers, the king, the queen, and their only daughter, the beautiful and charming princess, who everyone believed to be a paragon of virtue. One evening, however, a strange wind blew across the village. It carried with it a chill that clung to the air, unsettling the animals, and sending shivers down the villagers' spines. This was the first sign. In the days that followed, crops began to wilt, and the rivers that once provided fresh, clear water turned murky. Livestock grew sick and weak, their once healthy bodies becoming frail, and soon after, people began to fall ill too. It was as if a shadow had descended upon the village, draining life from everything in its path. The village elders, worried and desperate, gathered in the king's courtyard. They spoke of signs, of omens, of curses that might have befallen their peaceful home. The king, a man of reason and tradition, called upon the village's oracle, an old and revered woman who had lived through many ages and had always been able to see the truth behind such mysteries. The oracle, with her ancient eyes clouded by time, sat before the king, and after much prayer and communion with the gods, she spoke. "A great wrong has been committed," she said, her voice rasping like the wind through dry leaves. "The gods are angry, and the land has been cursed. Only a ritual of cleansing will lift this curse. It must be performed by one who is pure of heart and body. It must be performed by a virgin." At this, the room fell silent. The king, the queen, and the elders exchanged troubled glances, but they agreed. The only way to save the village from further suffering was to find a virgin who could partake in the ritual. So, the search began. Messengers were sent to every corner of the village to find a young girl who could fulfill the oracle's requirements. Families brought forth their daughters, hoping that their purity would restore life to the village and end the curse that had brought them so much suffering. But, as each girl was examined by the village seers and elders, it soon became clear that something was wrong. Not one of the girls was pure. Not one of them could perform the ritual. As the days turned into weeks, and the village continued to wither, panic began to spread. How could it be that in a village so full of life and families, not a single virgin remained? The king, growing more desperate by the day, summoned the oracle once more. "What is this?" the king demanded, his voice laced with frustration. "How can it be that no girl in the village is pure enough to save us?" The oracle looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "The gods see everything," she said slowly. "There is more to this calamity than what you know. There is a darkness that has grown from within. The corruption that has cursed this land comes not only from the heavens, but from the people themselves." Her words sent a murmur through the crowd of elders and courtiers gathered in the king's hall. The king, troubled and uncertain, ordered that the search continue. But as more girls were brought forth and found impure, rumors began to spread. Quiet whispers filled the village. Some said the gods had forsaken them entirely, while others believed that someone, somewhere, had done something so terrible that it had doomed them all. It was in the midst of this growing tension that a young woman named Nala came forward, her face pale and her hands trembling. She was one of the girls who had been examined earlier and found to be no longer a virgin. Now, she stood before the village council, her voice barely above a whisper as she revealed a secret that would shake the village to its core. "There is something you must know," Nala said, her eyes downcast. I did not lose my purity willingly. None of us did." The council fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The king, seated on his throne, leaned forward, his expression darkening. "What do you mean, child?" he asked softly, though there was a clear edge to his voice. Nala swallowed hard, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. It is the princess," she confessed. She has been running a secret business, a place where men come to be with the girls of the village. We were tricked, all of us. We thought we were serving the palace, but it was something else. Something terrible." Gasps echoed through the hall. The king's face paled as he turned to look at his daughter, who stood in the corner, her eyes wide and her face ashen. The queen covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. "You lie," the king roared, rising to his feet. His anger filled the room like a storm, but Nala remained firm, her fear overshadowed by the weight of the truth. "I speak the truth, my king," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "The princess has been running a secret brothel, recruiting girls from the village without their knowledge. We were made to believe it was honorable work, that we were serving the crown, but it was all a lie." The king turned to the princess, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice thick with emotion. The princess, her face drained of all color, opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence that followed her hesitation was enough to confirm the truth. Chaos erupted in the hall. The elders shouted. The queen wept, and the king stood frozen, his mind reeling. How could his daughter, the one he had raised to be the beacon of virtue and grace, have done something so vile? How had she managed to deceive them all? The village, once united in its suffering, now found itself divided. The revelation of the princess's secret business sent shockwaves through the community. Some called for her punishment, believing that the gods had cursed the village as a result of her greed and corruption. Others, however, were more concerned about how to lift the curse now that no virgin remained. As the king struggled to come to terms with his daughter's betrayal, the village descended into turmoil. The elders convened in secret meetings, trying to decide how to proceed. The people, once hopeful for salvation, were now angry and confused. The curse had not only stripped the village of its prosperity, but had also exposed the rot that had been festering beneath the surface for years. The king, torn between his duty to his people and his love for his daughter, was at a loss. How could he save the village now? How could he cleanse the land when the only person responsible for the curse was his own flesh and blood? And what would become of his people if the curse could not be lifted? As night fell, a cold wind swept through the village once more. The darkness seemed thicker now, the air heavy with tension. The villagers gathered in small groups, whispering about what was to come. Some spoke of revolt, of overthrowing the royal family and starting anew. Others feared that the gods would never forgive them, that the curse would only grow worse as the days went on. In the king's palace, the tension was palpable. The queen, devastated by the truth, had retreated to her chambers, while the princess remained under close watch. The king sat alone in the great hall, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. He knew that the village would not survive much longer under the curse, but the solution seemed further out of reach than ever. And then, just when it seemed that hope was lost, a messenger arrived from the oracle. She had sent word that there was still a way to lift the curse, but it would come at a great cost, a cost that the village might not be willing to pay. The king's heart sank as he read the oracle's message. The ritual could still be performed, but the sacrifice required was far greater than the blood of a virgin. It would require a life, and not just any life. The king knew what this meant. The price for the village's salvation was his daughter. As he sat in the darkness of the great hall, the weight of his decision pressing down on him, the king realized that his troubles were far from over. The village would soon demand justice, and he would have to choose between his daughter's life and the survival of his people. The winds howled outside, and the king knew that the real battle had only just begun. The king sat alone in the great hall, the flickering torches casting long shadows on the walls. His mind was in turmoil, the weight of the oracle's message heavy on his chest. He had always believed himself to be a just ruler, a protector of his people. But now he found himself facing an impossible decision. The village was dying, the land cursed, and the people would not survive much longer without the ritual. But to perform the ritual now meant one thing: the death of his daughter, the princess. He couldn't reconcile the two truths. How could he, as a father, allow his only child to be sacrificed? But how could he, as a king, allow his people to perish? The oracle had spoken. The ritual required a life, an innocent life. And in the eyes of the gods, the princess's sins had been laid bare. She was responsible for the calamity. Her betrayal, her greed, had brought the curse upon them all. As the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the palace, the king felt his heart harden. He knew that the decision was no longer his to make. The village would soon demand justice, and he would have to face them with an answer. He rose from his seat, his body heavy with the burden of leadership, and walked slowly toward the royal chambers where his daughter was being kept. The queen was there, sitting beside the princess, her eyes red from weeping. She looked up as the king entered, her expression pleading. But she said nothing. The princess sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale and drawn. Gone was the confidence and charm she had once carried so easily. Now, she was a shadow of herself, weighed down by the consequences of her actions. The king stood before his daughter, his face stern. "The oracle has spoken," he said quietly. "The ritual can still be performed, but it requires a life. Your life." The princess flinched at his words but did not protest. She had known, ever since Nala had revealed her secret, that this moment would come. She had betrayed her people, and now they would demand justice. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant for things to go this far. I didn't know the gods would punish us like this." The king clenched his jaw. "You allowed greed and deceit to corrupt this village. You led the girls astray. You have brought this calamity upon us all." The princess bowed her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had no defense. The guilt she felt was overwhelming, and the fear of what was to come gripped her heart. The queen, unable to bear the tension any longer, spoke up. "Please," she begged, "is there no other way? Must we lose our daughter to save the village? Can the gods not be appeased without bloodshed?" The king's expression softened for a moment as he looked at his wife, but then he shook his head. "The oracle has made it clear. The gods demand a sacrifice. Only through the death of the one responsible for this curse can the village be saved." The princess looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I will do it," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "If my life is the price for the village's salvation, then I will give it. I cannot undo what I've done, but I can at least make this right." The king stared at her, his heart aching. He had never imagined that his reign would end like this, that his family would be torn apart by such a tragedy. But he knew that she spoke the truth. The village would never be free of the curse as long as she lived. That night, the king summoned the elders and the village council. He explained the situation to them, the oracle's message, and the sacrifice that was required. The news spread quickly through the village, and by morning, a crowd had gathered outside the palace gates, waiting for the final decision. The mood in the village was somber. Many of the villagers had known the princess since she was a child, and though they were angry about her betrayal, there was still sorrow in their hearts. No one had expected things to come to this, but the curse had left them no choice. The crops had withered. The rivers had dried up, and people were dying. They could not afford to let the curse linger any longer. The king, standing before the gathered crowd, addressed his people. "The gods have spoken," he said, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "The calamity that has befallen us is a result of the corruption that has taken root in our village. My daughter, the princess, is responsible for this curse, and the gods demand her life as a sacrifice to cleanse the land." There were murmurs among the crowd, but no one spoke out. They had all seen the suffering, felt the weight of the curse. They knew that the king's words were true. The king took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. "Tomorrow at dawn, the ritual will be performed. The curse will be lifted, and our village will be saved." The crowd dispersed, and the king returned to the palace, where the queen and princess awaited him. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, but there was also a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. That night, as the village prepared for the ritual, a strange calm settled over the land. The wind, which had howled for weeks, suddenly grew still. The sky cleared, and the stars shone brightly above. It was as if the gods were watching, waiting for the sacrifice that would restore balance to the land. At dawn, the villagers gathered at the sacred clearing where the ritual would take place. The oracle stood at the center, her gnarled staff in hand, as the king and queen led the princess to the altar. The air was thick with anticipation, and not a sound could be heard except for the soft rustling of leaves in the trees. The princess, dressed in simple white robes, walked with her head held high. She had made her peace with what was to come. She knelt before the altar, her heart pounding in her chest, and closed her eyes. The oracle raised her staff, her voice echoing through the clearing as she called upon the gods to witness the sacrifice. The tension in the air was palpable, and the villagers held their breath as the ritual began. But just as the oracle was about to complete the ceremony, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. "Stop!" a voice rang out. All eyes turned toward the figure, and the crowd parted to reveal Nala, the young woman who had first exposed the princess's secret. She walked toward the altar, her face set in determination. "The princess does not deserve to die," Nala said, her voice steady. "Yes, she has sinned, but the gods do not ask for revenge. They ask for atonement. The curse can be lifted, but not through bloodshed. The gods demand repentance, not death." The oracle frowned, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying, child?" Nala turned to face the crowd, her voice rising. "The curse was brought upon us because of greed and corruption. But we can cleanse the village through unity, through forgiveness. The princess must atone for her actions, but taking her life will only bring more suffering. If we show the gods that we are willing to forgive..." The crowd murmured, unsure of what to make of Nala's words. The king stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "And how do you propose we do this?" he asked. Nala took a deep breath. The princess must renounce her title and devote herself to the people she has wronged. She must work to rebuild what she has destroyed, to heal the wounds she has caused. This is the true sacrifice the gods demand, not her life, but her pride. The oracle was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Nala. Finally, she lowered her staff and nodded. "The gods have spoken through you, child. The ritual will not require blood, but the princess must atone for her sins in this way." The tension in the clearing eased, and a sense of relief washed over the crowd. The king looked at his daughter, his heart heavy but hopeful. The curse could be lifted, and his daughter could be spared. The princess, tears streaming down her face, knelt before Nala and the oracle. "I will atone," she whispered. "I will spend the rest of my life making amends for what I have done." And with that, the ritual was completed, not with blood, but with a vow. The skies cleared, the winds calmed, and the curse that had plagued the village began to lift. The villagers returned to their homes, knowing that the road to healing would be long, but they were no longer divided. The princess, once a symbol of betrayal, would now become a symbol of redemption, working side by side with the people she had wronged to restore their land to its former glory. And the village, though scarred by the events that had unfolded, would survive. The calamity had passed, and with time, the village would flourish once again. But the memory of those dark days would remain, a reminder that the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with the heart. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video. Let us know your views in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one.